Okay, so there's another topic that I wanted to bring up. Lots of COVID-19, implications in intellectual property, and so I have another one that we were talking about over the weekend, and that is this Defense Production Act that the White House has, the executive branch has instituted or reinstated, or and essentially, as far as I know it, is that allows the president to essentially encourage or even force companies to produce products that are needed for national defense or for national safety, right?
Right. So,
The question was, who owns the IP then? If Ford is making ventilators, they don't really make ventilators as far as I know, but they can make anything if they really wanted to.
Right.
We're told to. So by the government. But then in that case, then who owns the IP in that? So it was just a curious question that I had, and I don't know if you had much chance to look into it or not. But.
Well, so here's what I did. In advance of this call, about 3 minutes ago, I printed out something on the Defense Production Act. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right. I know very little about it, but let me tell you, let's just do a quick background, okay? So here's what I came up with. It does three things, essentially. There's three main sections. One is called priorities and allocations, which allow the president to require corporations to accept and prioritize contracts for services and materials deemed necessary to aid U.S. national defense. That's one relevant part.
Yeah.
The second one is called expansion of productive capacity and supply, which gives the president the authority to create incentives for industry to produce critical materials, okay? So essentially, those two provisions, apparently what they could do is, if you have a bunch of contracts lined up, the president can order you to reprioritize those to do stuff, to make stuff that we need to protect ourselves, like masks and ventilators and things like that. Or they could incentivize you to produce stuff that you might not otherwise produce. Like you said, Ford makes cars and maybe a bunch of other things, but I don't think they make ventilators, but maybe they could. So now your question is, who owns the IP? So the first question, or the first part is, it presumes that IP is created. So let's say that the president tells Ford to make ventilators. And again, I don't know much about this Defense Production Act. Let's assume that's what the president can do based upon what I just read. If they tell them to make ventilators, what's the likelihood that they are going to spend a year or two in research and development to come up with a new way to make ventilators in time to stop the emergency? So in all likelihood, they're going to have specifications that are either in the public, or they're going to get some kind of a non-exclusive license from some other company that's making ventilators. So first, maybe it's not likely that these companies would be innovating and creating IP in connection with production. But let's say that somebody does. They're very smart, and they either stumble upon or come up with a more effective way of their manufacturing process of ventilators, or a better ventilator, or a new feature or function that is patentable. So the question is, who owns it, right? So things that come to mind are, I'll bet you there's nothing in the Defense Production Act that defines ownership rights. I'm just betting that's the case. And if somebody knows otherwise, it'd be cool to get a comment on that.
Yeah.
But let's go to what we do know. There are rules about government-funded contractors and defense contractors, and companies that rely upon government contracts for their survival know all about this. And there are all kinds of rules around who owns the rights to the IP and who owns the IP. And if you are a defense contractor or a government contractor and you're being funded for government research, and IP comes out of that, is the byproduct of it, you own the patents, right? But the government has certain rights to it depending upon how it was funded, whether it was solely funded by the government or partially or something like that. the government owns certain rights, and they might even own rights to take your technology that might be your trade secreted technology or even your ultimately patented technology and reprocure some, the contract so they could have somebody else, one of your competitors, make the products. Yeah. But that's in government funded situations. What I'm reading in this, the government might incentivize you to do stuff. That means they might pay you, but I doubt that there's going to be contracts associated with that, like the standard government contracts that we have. There might be, I don't know enough about it, but that's the first question I'd ask. Let me see the documents, right? Show me the documents that were created in connection with the relationship with you and the federal government from where they incentivize you to make these ventilators or whatever for national defense or for a national emergency. And those documents would define it. But if there's nothing, if there's no documents, if there's nothing in those documents that defines the rights, ownership of the IP will reside with the company that came up with the IP.
It's really interesting. It's a really interesting landscape. And I mean, not that I would wish this upon anyone, but it would be interesting to see something like this play out in litigation, just because there's so many different moving pieces. And in a crisis, it's like, if a company is dropping its normal business in order to produce something for the national, the benefit of all of the people of a country, you would think that there would be a little bit of leeway given, but there are laws, and it's like,
yeah, did the people coming up with the act in 1950 or so think about that? Were they thinking about IP when they were coming up with this?
I don't know.
There's probably some pretty.
I don't know. It's in those situations, it's tough to think beyond the crisis, right? Which I think is what,
that probably provoked the action. I think it was the Korean War or something like that.
Yeah. Well, but anyway.
At the same time, IP is only becoming well known, in the general public since like the mid 90s,
right.
The mid 1990s. Before that, no one even knew what IP was, except, industries that are heavily IP centric, like the chemical industry and maybe the pharmaceutical industry. But IP wasn't really well known until it started to emerge as kind of a popular topic in the mid 90s, when big companies like Texas Instruments and IBM started getting a whole bunch of licensing revenue, and it started getting people to become more aware of, wow, there's real power in this IP. What is IP anyway?
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
And now here we are, recording a podcast, educating the world about stuff that they should know about IP. Well, thanks everybody for joining. I think this was a great conversation, really interesting topics. If you agree, if you have comments, if you disagree, if you have thoughts, please share them in the comment box, and always like and subscribe and share this with your friends, help spread the word.